Today I wanted to talk about the Meru. And I keep on coming back to the Meru because the Meru as a subject is extremely wide. And it will take more than a couple of videos to cover almost all of it. I wanted to focus on the Meru as a historical phenomenon. And I'm only talking about this because the Ministry of Education refuses to teach our students about this subject, which is a very interesting and fascinating subject. Now, the subject of the Meru goes way beyond Kenya. For many of you, you know that the Meru are an ethnic group which lives on the slopes of Mount Kenya. But that term Meru is a global term. This is part of my series focusing on hidden and suppressed history. You may or may not be aware, but a lot of the information taught in Kenyan schools is false history. A lot of the information that you think you know to be true is nothing but fabricated narratives, while the truth is suffocated. This is because the philosophical underpinnings of the Kenyan education system is Western European Freemasonry. In other words, the education system in Kenya is Masonic indoctrination, full of false narratives intended to glorify the European, that the government presents to students as the truth. This false information comes from the British, who write and produce the curriculum used in Kenya. And in fact, Kenyan national exams are written and produced in England. Everything in the education sector in Kenya is controlled from England. So you're given all these false narratives, which you then believe to be true because you don't have any other information contradicting the indoctrination in schools. So I decided to produce this series in order to set the record straight, in order to give you an opportunity to understand that the history that you were taught in school is almost completely false. And this is the counter narrative that is more accurate and more congruent with actual historical facts. So I'm not here to give you my opinion. I'm here to give you information that can be proven from history using accurate sources and artifacts that has been found all over the world. What is not taught in class is that in prehistorical times, there was a global culture called the Kushite culture. This Kushite culture can be considered the mother culture from which all other civilizations sprang up from. You may have encountered the word Kush from the Bible, but in reality is that Kush is more than the small area identified in the Bible that we call Sudan today. The Kushite culture stretched all over from Africa, going all the way to Australia and even in North and South America. But this is in prehistorical times. And what really gets mentioned in school is that in prehistorical times, there were no Europeans, there were no Asians, there were no Arabs. That particular mutation hadn't come into existence. So it was Africans who were living on the earth for thousands of years before all these other strains of humanity showed up. And we know this from multiple disciplines and studies. This is more than just from history books or archaeology. It's also from genetic discoveries that have been made in recent times. And in fact, in archaeology, there's a rule of thumb that says the farther back you go into history, the blacker the people become. In other words, the oldest artifacts, the oldest skeletons, the oldest cultures that are discovered always are black people. In every instance, the Aborigines or the original population of any area of Earth, once they're discovered and they're analyzed, it always turns out to be black people. So that the first people in Europe were black people, the first people in China were black people, the first people in Indonesia, Australia, North and South America were black people. The farther back you go, the blacker the gods become. And in fact, through modern genetic studies, you can see the exact point in history where the DNA mutated to create the first Europeans and the first Asiatics. And so we know there was a time period, thousands of years, before this mutation happened, where everyone on Earth was quote-unquote black or African. So we know that people spread from Africa throughout all these other areas of Earth. And it is these same Africans who are spreading. It wasn't Europeans or Arabs or anyone else. These groups did not exist yet. So as Africans spread, going all the way to Australia, slowly but surely, they covered all these other lands that are now considered Asia. So before the Asians existed in Asia, there were Africans in Asia. the original population of Asia was Africans, and you can still find them in different places in Asia. For example, you can find them in Philippines, in Indonesia, in India. You find very many black people. They are normally not put in the media because many nations hate Africans deeply, hate black people deeply. So they won't put them on TV. So you think they don't exist in those countries, but they do exist in those countries. They still survived the onslaught by the invading Asians. Given that that is the background, I also wanted to say where that comes from. So that comes from the ancient Kushite culture that spread from Africa all the way to Australia. Now, these Kushites used to use the word Meru to refer to themselves. When you consider the oldest writings that can be found in ancient Kemet and ancient, again, Sumeru, which the Greeks call Sumeria, you will discover that the people of Mesopotamia would use the word Meru in many instances, or would use the word derived from the word Meru. We are not very sure why that word was very common, but it was very common, as we'll demonstrate. So in Sumeria, you'll find that the cities were called Ur, Uruk, and all these words Ur, Uruk are derived from from the root word that is called Meru. So anytime you encounter the word Meru, you know you're dealing with Kushites, okay? You're not dealing with any other group. So that when the people of ancient Sumeria call themselves the Meru, because the word Sumeria is literally the word Su-Meru, you know you're dealing with Kushites, you're dealing with black people. And so when you're reading your Bible, normally the Europeans will present these characters from the Bible, like Abraham, all those people, as ethnic Europeans. This is false, because the Bible itself says that Abraham came from Ur of Chaldea. He was a Sumerian, and if he was a Sumeru, then he was a quote-unquote Kushite. He was a black person. He was not an ethnic European, because at that time, and this is circa about 2000 BC, the Mzungu as he exists today did not exist, literally. So it's very important you understand that a lot of the history that you're taught is called whitewashed history, where every ancient group of people is presented to you as ethnic Europeans, and there is a systematic attempt to erase black people or Africans from history. Yet the exact opposite is true. Now you find that in Sumeria, you had the Sumeru, using the same word Meru. Now you come back to Africa at that time, and you go to the kingdom of Kush, in what is today called Sudan. Now they had a very big city that is called Meru, but it's spelled Meroi, but the word is Meru. So their main city was called Meru. Now you go north to ancient Kemet. In ancient Kemet, they used to build pyramids. Now, pyramid, the word pyramid is a Greek word. The Kemetic word for pyramid, again, is Meru. Like it's an artificial mountain. And so you come back to Kenya, which is on the east coast of Africa, and you find that we have a huge mountain called Mount Kenya, and on the slopes of Mount Kenya live a people who call themselves the Meru. You go to just south, you'll encounter a mountain called Mount Meru in Tanzania. And then you go further south, you'll encounter a mountain called Kilimanjaro. And on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro is a group of people, again, who are called the Meru. So you keep on seeing the name Meru being associated with a mountain, one or another. And going back to the Bible, if you remember correctly, you're told that Abraham was invited by a deity he encountered, and the deity told him, look, I want you to make a sacrifice to me. Come up the mountain and make the sacrifice. What was the name of that mountain? They will spell it Moriah, but the reality, it is called Mount Meru. Every single mountain in the Kushitic civilization in prehistoric times is called Meru. Going all the way to Australia, before the British invaded, at the time of the invasion, Australia was full of black people. And the British committed a terrifying genocide. They killed majority of the black people of Australia. And then they stole that land, and now they claim it as their own. Now, once they got to Australia, they encountered a particular tribe that was called the Meru. Now, this is a tribe that was, really, it was a confederation of tribes. and they lived around what is today the city called Adelaide. And when you go to Adelaide, just slightly to the east, you'll discover that there's a river that is called River Meru, but the Europeans spell it as River Murray, Murray, but the historical term is River Meru because that entire area was populated by a group of people that are known as the Meru. Most of them were killed off by the British, but it shows you that the name Meru is also all the way in Australia, clearly proving ties between all these groups that are calling themselves the Meru. What is also interesting about the Meru of Australia is that they had 10 clans, and one of those 10 clans was called the Molo. And you come back to Kenya, you'll discover that there's a group of people who call themselves the El Molo. And Molo is also a place, a geographical place in Kenya, and it is also a place in Australia. North of Australia is Papua New Guinea. If you go to Papua New Guinea, you'll go find a district that is called the Meru district. If you go to the island of Indonesia, the name Meru is extremely common. It is a name that is used for beaches, for hotels, for localities, for roads, and for many other reasons. And the highest point, the highest mountain in Java, in Indonesia, is a mountain called Semeru. The name of the mountain is Meru. The SE is simply a prefix that they use for their language. It shows you that before Indonesia was invaded by the Asiatic type, it was totally populated by black people. And in fact, there are entire provinces of Indonesia full of black people that are, currently being oppressed and attacked violently by the Indonesian military. But the bottom line is this: the name Meru is extremely common in Indonesia. If you go to Indonesia today, you'll find the name Meru almost everywhere, even for islands, even for all sorts of things. And when you just cross over from Indonesia and you go to Cambodia, in Cambodia there's an ancient empire, an ancient civilization that was based upon the Khmer people. Now, the Khmer people, that is the English rendition of that word. The actual name is the Meru people of Cambodia. And this ancient Cambodian empire was centered on a mountain again called Meru, because all mountains in the ancient Kushite civilization were called Meru. Now, when you talk about the American continent, what Europeans will claim is that America was named after Amerigo Vespucci. This is not correct. The term America existed before Europeans invaded and attacked that continent. And in fact, the name America is derived from a local language called Amarucan. So America was always called Amarucan. It's not named after a European. And the word Amarucan, the etymology and the root of that word is Meru. And it symbolizes, or it's meant to mean a serpent, a kind of divine serpent called Amarucan. Now, the name of that serpent, according to different cultures in North and South America, of course, the name will change. But originally, the term Amarucan is associated with a particular serpent that used to be worshipped in ancient times. And so you find like the American rap singer who's called Tupac Amaru. The word Amaru is the same word as Ameru. In fact, the word Meru is extremely common in North and South America. And in fact, the original civilization that created or spawned the later civilizations of the Inca and the Maya, the original civilization is called the Olmec. And the Olmecs were black people. And that's why you keep on seeing the word Meru occurring, because North and South America was part of the ancient Kushite empire and civilization that had spread all over the earth. Today, there's a country called Peru. Now, the word Peru is derived from the word Meru. So it's just the P that was interchanged for the M. And Peru, for a long time, was ruled by a kingdom that is now known as the Inca kingdom. Now, the word Inca is very interesting because the word Inca is closely associated with the word Enki. And the word Enki is associated with the ancient Sumerian god Enki. And it is Enki who warned Atrahasis that a flood was coming. And he told Atrahasis, build a boat because a flood is coming that you may escape the flood. And it is this same god Enki that the Maasai called Enkai. that the Kikuyu called Ngai, the Swahili called Mungu or Mulungu or Murungu, which the Dravidians of Indians call Murugan. So you can clearly see association between the names that are being used all over the world. Why? Because all these cultures come from the ancient culture called the Kushite Empire that had spread all over the earth and used the name Meru extensively to describe themselves and to describe the mountain upon which they would worship their gods. So going back to Mesopotamia and ancient Kemet, we do know that the 4th dynasty pharaoh called Sneferu imported timber called Meru oak that he used to build the palace doors. Now, this sort of historical information should be taught to students, but it's not. So the idea of Meru oak is not new at all. The people of ancient Kemet were trading in Meru oak all those thousands of years ago. And yes, they called it Meru oak. They didn't use the word oak because oak is English. They used their own word, but it's Meru oak. They used the word Meru for that particular tree. In Mesopotamia and ancient Kemet also, the word Meru is also associated with one of the first kings that arose and has become famous. In the Bible, they will talk about a powerful man called Nimrod. That is the English rendition of the word. The original rendition of the word is Nare Meru. That's what he was called. And what is interesting is that Nare Meru becomes Nimrod in Mesopotamia. He also becomes Nare Meru, the first king of United Kemet. The king who founded ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, is also called Nare Meru, which the Bible renders as, or the British render as Nimrod. It's the same name. It is practically the same person. And if you read your Bible, you'll see that Nimrod, his father was Cush. He came from the line of Cush. Again, proving the point that in ancient times, there was an ancient civilization called the Kushitic civilization that associated itself with the name Meru. And also the name Meru means black, because it is from this name Meru that you get the name Muru, which is rendered in English as Moor, M-O-O-R, which means a black person. So the word Moor is also the word Meru. It also means black. So the ancient people of ancient Sumeria, they would call themselves the Sangika, or the black people. The people of Kemet called their country Kemet, or the black land. And all these ancient empires associated with Kushites, who refer to themselves as the Meru. That in Kenya today, you will find a town called Narumoru, which is the exact rendition of the word Nimrod. And Nimrod, according to the Bible, he's the son of Cush. He's the first ruler of earth. He's the first king of Sumeru or Sumeria. He's the founder of Babylon, of Erech, of Akkad. Nimrod predates Hammurabi. And so the very word Nimrod, or there are many renditions of that word. There is Namerut, Nameru, Narimeru, Narumoru. All those words mean the same thing, and they are derived from the root word Meru. And therefore, I always say that the people who call themselves Meru in Kenya, they are special people because they carry this special name and they've carried it for thousands of years, proving a distinct connection between themselves and the first ruler of earth, who the Bible calls Nimrod.